Hello there, and welcome back to War Thunder, to the ship review on the Fletcher. As usual, I also have a 5-minute guide, more or less, mostly more, from Drachinifel on this ship and its historical course. So in game, then I shall review it, and I think since it is very similar to the USS Cowell, which is the premium destroyer, you might already know what to expect, but obviously in the good tradition of War Thunder, that a premium ship is just simply better in certain aspects than its tech tree version, I think I'll go with this one here, and then we'll see how it goes. So let's begin with the 5-minute guide, and then we will have the review of the ship itself a bit later. I hope you enjoy.
The Fletcher class was the single largest class of destroyers ever built, thanks mostly to the Wicks and Clemson classes being similar but divided into two separate entities. The Fletchers achieved a status that is near mythical in military procurement circles, being the right equipment, invented at exactly the right time, with plenty of room for expansion, and built in vast numbers. This tends to happen very rarely, and the machines that hit this mark, such as the Spitfire, the F4 Phantom II, or as it's possibly starting to look, possibly even the Type 26 frigate, tend to become very well known. The Fletcher joined this select group in part due to sheer luck. The London Naval Treaty in 1930 had limited destroyers to 1,850 tons, and guns not exceeding 5.1 inches. And preceding US destroyer designs had wandered back and forth between this limit and a lower, approximately 1,500 ton figure. The problem with this limit, similar to the treaty limit on cruiser displacement, was that to build a ship with guns up to the maximum allowable caliber, which many nations did, tended to leave them both lacking in other departments and either dangerously top-heavy, or with little room for expansion, or both. For example, the immediately previous destroyer classes carried a similar main battery and torpedo armament, but would very rapidly lose guns and or torpedo launchers, either just to keep the ships upright, or to make room for a meaningful anti-aircraft armament outside of angry words, beyond the main battery. Or, again, to do both. The Fletcher class benefited from being the first generation of destroyers the USN would design once the International Naval Treaty System had collapsed. Compared to the destroyers of many other nations, they also had to cope with long-range deployments across the Pacific, and initially when word got around that a larger destroyer was being designed, the proposed armament was listed as 5 5-inch dual-purpose guns, 12 torpedo tubes, and 28 depth charges, with speed requirements varying from 35 to 38 knots, along with an 18-inch increase in beam over previous designs. But this would simply have repeated the problems of the previous classes on a larger scale, and luckily this was reined in, with the final planned armament retaining the 5 single-mounted 5-inch guns, with 2 superfiring forward, 2 superfiring aft, and 1 just forward of the rear pair, on the other side of a light anti-aircraft platform. However, the 12 torpedo tubes were cut down to 2 quintuple torpedo launchers on the centre line, and an anti-aircraft armament of a quad 1.1-inch cannon mount and 6 single 50 caliber machine guns, along with 2 stern-mounted depth charge racks, which completed the loadout. This gave them the firepower to take on pretty much any foreign design, with only highly specialist ships having any kind of major advantage. For example, a tribal class outgunned a Fletcher quite significantly, but the Fletcher carried many more torpedoes. A number of Japanese destroyer classes carried many more torpedoes, but equally would be at a significant disadvantage in a gun duel, and so on. Displacing just over 2,000 tons at standard loading, their 60,000 shaft horsepower engines drove them through the water at just over 36 knots using a pair of screws, although some individual ships were faster. The reduction in armament compared to the initial plans, and the increased beam, left them very stable, with plenty of room to take upgrades. As a result, shortly after Pearl Harbor caused the United States Navy to make the managers of Bofors and Oerlikon very happy indeed, the Fletchers started to gain anti-aircraft armament along with more and more advanced radars, sonars and fire control suites, without becoming overly compromised or losing any of their primary weapons or torpedo tubes. Depending on the ship, between 2 and 5 twin 40mm Bofors mounts and typically 7 single 20mm Oerlikons plus half a dozen depth charge throwers would appear in relatively short order. Later in the war, as the Imperial Japanese Navy's surface threat was somewhat diminished and the kamikaze threat was rapidly increasing, the ships would finally have to sacrifice something, with a number of them losing one of the quintuple launchers for a revised AA battery of 2 quad 40mm Bofors plus a twin mount, along with 7 single 20mm being swapped for 6 twin 20mm mounts, for a total of 27 anti-aircraft guns if you included the main battery. A very few would even reach the dizzying heights of 14 40mm barrels on a destroyer. They would also be the last primarily gun-based destroyers built by the United States Navy that used the single 5-inch mount. The derivative Sumner and Gearing classes were built using the ubiquitous 5-inch 38 caliber twin turret found on practically every US ship larger than a destroyer during World War II. Their only real weakness was the flush deck hull, which made them somewhat less seaworthy than was necessarily ideal, but this was not usually a problem in the typically calm waters of the Pacific. A total of 175 would be built, with 13 of the ships cancelled toward the end of the war. Casualties would amount to 19 sunk and 6 damaged beyond repair, in return for reaping a rather fearful toll of Japanese aircraft and not a few ships as well. 3 were actually built with aircraft catapults instead of the rear torpedo launcher and middle gun, but these were not considered a success and were converted back to their normal configuration fairly quickly. In addition to all of this, 52 of the ships would be sold after the war to a total of 14 different navies, including, ironically, the Japanese and West German forces, with the last active ships leaving service with the Mexican Navy in 2001. A total of 4 of the class are preserved. Kidd, Cassin Young and the Sullivans are in the United States, and the Velos, formerly USS Charette, is in Greece.
In War Thunder, the Fletcher has actually, as one of the few destroyers, armor. First of all, the turrets are armored only with 13.2mm anti-fragmentation armor, so even 20mm at short range can take them out and disable them, and they are not the smallest turrets. On the other hand, you have 5 overall. So there are good and bad things. The turret, however, are dual purpose, and they also rotate very fast. They are amongst the fastest turning turrets in War Thunder. Then we also have the conning tower here with 19mm, but the bridge itself here has no armor, so you still lose your ability to steer the ship for a considerable amount of time with a bridge hit quite often, which is super annoying and one of those game mechanics that might be realistic but is certainly not fun. Then there are 10 torpedo tubes in 2 mountings of 5 torpedoes each, and you should get rid of those torpedoes because they are very prominent, they have no cover, they have no armor, and it is a roll with the dice if they blow up by a direct hit or not. And when one of the torpedoes even goes off, then your entire ship gets counted as being lost or fully destroyed. And if you use them with or without torpedo mod, well, maybe a bit more on this later. But then we come to the hull, and the ship actually has some hull armor. It's only fragmentation armor, it's only 13mm thick. It will not stop a 5-inch main gun round from an enemy destroyer with high explosive, but it severely will reduce the damage, and also it will reduce completely the damage incoming from some of the autocannons on the Project 159 or the Albatross, you name it, and everything with less than 5-inch guns will do significantly less damage. We also have now a bit of deck armor of anti-fragmentation, so that is good. On the other hand, if you get shot at with AP and you are like this, then you can be sure that the shells will go off in the middle of the ship, because there is some hindrance that actually activates the fuse. So both good and bad for the destroyer. It's not magical, but it is something, and you might feel the difference if you have played some of the other unarmored destroyers of other nations. Talking about the X-ray here, we can see that the ammo racks are partially just at the waterline, but even a bit above, and they are directly below the turrets where you would expect them, and there are not small targets, so you can blow them up. Although having it in common with the Germans and the Russians, that if the front ammo rack gets hit and you are not severely damaged enough on the rest of the ship, you actually can survive this, but then you will lose all your ammunition. But I would not count on this. The same for the rear. Just under the middle turret there is no ammo rack as far as I can see. The steering mechanism and the pumps are positioned in the back of the ship, and they get hit when I drive or sail the ship quite repeatedly. And the rest of the propulsion system is also on the waterline, although it wouldn't make a big difference. So the ship is not that resilient to incoming fire, but it's a destroyer. Who would have guessed? In comparison to the other destroyers of other nations at the same battle rating, we can see that the armament is fairly standard. We have 5 127mm or 5-inch guns. They are dual purpose, 5 13 Mark 12 guns, and we overall have a very nice complement of ammunition with 1800 rounds. That's 3 times of what the German and the Russian destroyers can actually pump out over the course of the battle. The reload isn't bad either, only beaten by 10% by the insane reload of the type 1934A with 4.0 seconds for an ace crew. The effective DPM, if you fire all guns repeatedly as fast as the reload goes with an ace crew, is 75 rounds. That is still very good, but again here the Germans have with 83.3 rounds in theory a bit the upper hand, and you are also very close to the Tribal, the HMS Eskimo F-75 for the British. Only the Russians really lag behind. Let's talk about the torpedoes. I told you that we have 10, which is the highest amount of them. Standard caliber 533mm, and depending if you not use the torpedo mode, you can go up to 13.7 kilometers in range, but then the torpedoes are relatively slow. With the without the torpedo mode, you go by 83 kilometers per hour, but only 5.5 kilometers. But mostly that's still enough for combat distances. The displacement of the ship itself is also, well, quite in the middle with just under 3,000 tons and a fairly respectable top speed of 65 kilometers per hour. Also not the very best, but definitely not the worst. The crew complement is here actually the second lowest. Only the Project 7U has less with 273 men, so you will lose your crew with successful penetrating hits rather quickly. Next thing, let's finally talk about the ammunition, and the first shell in this comparison is the 127mm AAC high explosive round, and you can see it is not bad at all. It actually has a very high bursting charge, it has a very good damage output. On the other hand, the muzzle velocity is the slowest in comparison. Also, the shells seem to have a lot of air drag, so they are very lazy, and the accuracy is also not the greatest. So in a ship versus ship duel, despite having good DPM, the stock HE round is not too good either. Although if you hit the ship, you mostly do considerable damage. Only the Project 7U in this comparison is better. The second out of the 3 shell types is the Tier 1 upgrade modification, which is the 127mm common APHE round. It is not designated as a semi-armor piercing. On the other hand, it lacks the pure penetration power, it has the lowest muzzle velocity, and the bursting charge is actually only half as good as the Russian on the Project 7U. But on the other hand, it is better in terms of post-penetration damage than the German and the British destroyer counterparts' shells. And with the DPM, in theory, especially at close quarters, it is still a significant threat. If something is bow in, and even if something has armor, you still can have a go at it and try to pen it, and then you still do a lot of damage. But again, at long range, the lack of accuracy and the lack of then punching power at 5, 6, 7 kilometers, you should not engage anything that is Russian or German, especially in the cruiser department. But it is definitely a good shell, and you can take up to 1080 rounds with you out of your 1800 rounds. So that's more than half of the ammunition with only APHE possible. The third and last shell type that I bring to you, for the main guns at least, is the 127mm AAVT proximity fuse round. That is a tier 3 modification or upgrade, and you have to first research the APHE anyways. Again, ammunition capacity limitation is 1080 rounds, but that's more than good enough. The next thing is the shell is relatively cheap, with only 2 silver lines per shot, so it doesn't really matter. And that is a big addition to your overall firepower for numerous reasons. It has the very same statistics in terms of penetration, mass velocity, and also the TNT equivalent filler than the normal HE round. So it's a copy paste, only the fuse seems to be different, and that is good because you can actually now use the capabilities of this ship with the fast turret rotation speed and also with the amount of guns, the rate of fire, the DPM, to fire actively at aircraft, or let your anti-aircraft gunners do this, and it is highly effective at this. If you have seen my automatic videos, you might be aware what a massively bigger shell can then actually do to aircraft. And when there are more and more aircraft in the battle, the later the game goes, the more you actually can protect yourself from attacks. And again, since the turrets are so fast, you then can obviously very quickly react to also patrol boats with the same rounds. So that is a very powerful round. And since the rest of the anti-aircraft battery is also not that impressive, it's not the Cowell. We're only talking here about 6 20mm and one single double 40mm Bofors Mark 1 mounting. This is a significant improvement in anti-aircraft firepower. I highly recommend this. I will take 1080 rounds of this ammunition with me, and then 720 rounds of the APHE. The ammunition costs are not too high. It's actually neglectable compared to the repair price costs of the ship, which are nearly 8,000 silver lines. But again, it is not a neck-breaking repair cost if you compare it to some of the cruisers. So there you have it, the USS Fletcher, a very nice ship indeed. It is very well rounded. It can defend itself effectively versus aircraft, versus patrol boat, versus other destroyers, especially in a close quarters brawl, but it is not the very best at any given task. It has a little bit of armor, but it's not really something that can withstand main batteries from another destroyers. It has anti-aircraft firepower, but it is not a USS Sumner. It is not the slowest, but not the fastest. It's not the least maneuverable, but also not the most maneuverable. It is very well rounded. The difficult part is to survive the opening stages of a battle, especially if you spawn right in shooting range and shooting distance of the enemy cruisers, which is hilarious map design, Gaijin. So there is that, but the later the game goes, the better the ship gets. It can stay in the battle for active for the entire duration. It can defend itself, as I mentioned, versus patrol boats, can quickly react then thanks to the dual purpose capabilities of the guns and the fast turret traverse to aircraft attacks. And that is a big advantage compared to the Russian and German destroyers in particular. So the ship is really great and fun to use. It is effective, and therefore I like it. And for me, it gets a recommendation although in the current stages of War Thunder naval warfare, it is a bit difficult to see how good the ship truly can be. Again, cruisers are here the problem that just end your life within 1 or 2 salvos if you're unlucky. So, and finally, that is the final scene that I really wanted to show you. Some of you might have already seen the essential part of it on Dita's channel in Wins and Fails, but it's a few episodes back, so there you can see that the video footage is relatively old, a few months even, but nevertheless it is glorious. Here I just press very aggressively for B, and I have to deal here with this German patrol boat, the VS-10 I guess. And yeah, there are my, even the anti-aircraft machine guns are opening up. I hit him good, he slows down, and then we get his ammo rack. Good stuff right there, and we just happen to go into B. There's the first German destroyer and the second one. And I think to myself, oh, so typical, obviously, when I come around the corner, now there are 3 destroyers. Oh, come on. I focus here on the rear one, the Type 1924. Second salvo is already in the air, they ram each other, and so it's no wonder that I hit them both with this salvo, but the third salvo is in the air and hits hard on the torpedo tubes of the Z-20, detonating them both. And one of my torpedoes hits also a PT-159, and that's a triple kill with the patrol boat before that. That's a ×4. Here in slow motion, just look at this. It's so beautiful, I had to slow it down. Sorry for it being muted, but that a shell goes in on the torpedo tubes and wrecks them both. That is the most glorious thing ever. I just simply had to show it to you, and I think it's truly worth it. That made me smile the entire day. So that's it for me today, and the ship review on the Fletcher, a ship that I really like. Thanks for watching, thanks for listening. Please don't forget to give this video a like, share it with your friends, subscribe if you want to see more, and we'll see each other in the skies, on the battlefields, and on the waves of War Thunder.